Beneath the ashes of war lie corridors no map dares show, corridors of silence, where history was stripped of its skin and hidden in locked rooms. In those shadows, men carried secrets heavier than any weapon, guarded by lies and by graves. What remains is not peace, but an unfinished war, fought in whispers, coded files, and the breathless pause between truth and the sound of a closing door. At 3:12 on April 20, 1945, a weathered column of Opel Blitz trucks departed from an SS storage depot on the outskirts of Magdeburg under a moonless sky. Witnesses in the nearby village of Barlben, questioned later by advancing U.S. forces, recalled the convoy moving in total blackout conditions, escorted by a single SD, KFZ, 234 armored car and a motorcycle unit whose riders bore no visible insignia. The lead vehicle carried a hastily stenciled marking in white, Eisenregen. The final known sighting came from a Luftwaffe signal unit retreating toward Goslar. According to their field log, entry 448, Harz sector, the convoy entered the dense timberland near Ilsenburg, heading south. No further transmissions or visual reports followed. 17 days later, on May 7, 1945, a Soviet reconnaissance patrol from the 3rd Shock Army stumbled upon a clearing thick with the acrid stench of burned fuel. The remains of 3 trucks lay twisted and charred, their canvas covers shredded. Ammunition boxes, partially opened, were strewn across the site alongside the corpses of 5 German officers. Their uniforms were stripped of rank insignia, their paybooks missing. The Soviets noted the presence of unburned crates containing turbine components of a design they could not identify. One piece resembling a compressor ring, but machined from a lightweight alloy unknown to their engineers. Unofficially, Soviet engineers hypothesized a connection to the so-called Projekt Silbervogel, a suborbital bomber project believed to have been abandoned in late 1944. Yet the metallurgy reports filed by the Red Army's Technical Bureau classified the material as non-ferrous composite, probable experimental origin, and the documentation was placed under most important security category. Meanwhile, U.S. Army intelligence officers advancing from the west claimed no knowledge of the incident, despite records showing that elements of the 9th Armored Division had been within 20 kilometers of the Harz perimeter at the same time. A declassified G2 briefing dated June 3, 1945, references possible Soviet appropriation of advanced propulsion assemblies and unconfirmed SS scientific personnel movement, but the page ends abruptly, followed by a blank space where additional notes appear to have been physically removed. Local civilians questioned in 1946 by the Allied Control Commission spoke in hushed tones about the train that was not a train, describing how the convoy had been loaded at night from a warehouse near the Mittelland Canal, its cargo guarded by men in black leather coats rather than field gray. One farmer, an elderly man named Friedrich Neumann, claimed he saw a cylindrical object nearly 4 meters long being winched onto the last truck, covered in tarpaulin. He recalled the SS officer in charge warning his men in low, clipped tones that, if this shipment fails, the Reich fails. Newman's statement was never entered into official Allied records, surviving only in the personal notebook of a British liaison officer. For decades, Operation Eisenregen was a ghost entry in war diaries, mentioned, redacted, and then forgotten. But in 1991, after German reunification, a researcher in the Bundesarchiv stumbled across an index card misfiled in the Transportation Losses section. The card, typed in fading purple ink, read simply, Eisenregen, verlegt April 1945, Harz/Brocken, Enziel, TB Schwarzkopf. No known military map contains a location named Schwarzkopf, leading some historians to speculate it was a code name for a concealed testing site. Additional fragments surfaced in 2007 when a retired Soviet intelligence officer, Colonel Mikhail Baranov, agreed to be interviewed on camera. Baranov, then in his late 80s, claimed to have personally supervised the removal of the surviving turbine parts from the Harz site. According to him, the components were shipped to the Central Aerohydrodynamic Institute in Moscow under the cover story of a captured industrial generator. He insisted, however, that the most critical part of the convoy's cargo, a sealed container guarded separately, was never found. Baranov's own field diary allegedly recorded that the container was taken before our arrival, heading west, destination unknown. Attempts to locate surviving Eisenregen personnel met with little success. SS Transport Officer Karl-Heinz Ammler, believed to have been the convoy's logistic commander, vanished after May 1945. His name appears on no prisoner lists, denazification registers, or post-war address inquiries. A declassified CIA memo from 1953, marked internal use only, notes an unverified sighting of Ammler in Buenos Aires, working as a shipping consultant under an assumed name, but the lead was dropped without explanation. A rare surviving artifact connected to the operation resides in a private collection in Munich, a fragment of a metal panel bearing an engraved serial number beginning with EIS-. Metallurgical analysis in 2014 found the alloy to be a titanium-aluminum blend far ahead of German industrial capabilities in 1945, fueling speculation that the material was either experimental or acquired from an external source. Today, the original Eisenregen file in the Bundesarchiv consists of only 8 documents, each with sections blacked out. Requests for unredacted access have been denied on grounds of national security relevance. Neither the U.S. National Archives nor the Russian State Military Archive acknowledges holding related material, though multiple independent researchers have received anonymous warnings to cease further inquiries. What remains are the lingering questions. Why was such a convoy moving in April 1945, when the Reich was days from collapse? Why risk transporting untested technology through contested territory? And most pressing of all, if the Soviets did not capture the most valuable part of Eisenregen's cargo, then who did? In the shadows of history, the Harz forest still guards its secret, and the final destination of Operation Eisenregen remains unknown. On the night of February 14, 1948, the Danish lighthouse keeper at WWII reported seeing a dim light flicker offshore, then vanish. The next morning, local fishermen found a half-submerged trawler drifting 8 nautical miles southeast of Bornholm Island. Its nameplate had been pried off, the hull bore fresh scorch marks, and no crew remained aboard. In the wheelhouse, wedged beneath the chart table, was a watertight canister containing 7 reels of 16mm microfilm, each meticulously labeled in Gothic script as Projekt Bernsteinvogel. The Danish coastal authorities turned the material over to British naval intelligence under a quiet arrangement codified during the war. Within 48 hours, the reels were at the Royal Navy's Intelligence Division in Whitehall. The contents stunned the analysts: aerial reconnaissance photographs of Allied bomber formations, taken at altitudes and angles inconsistent with any known Luftwaffe or post-war aircraft. The dates stamped on the margins ranged from September 1945 to March 1946, months after Germany's surrender. Technical experts noted that the resolution of the images exceeded wartime standards, suggesting the use of a stabilized, high-speed reconnaissance camera. Yet the serial codes on the film stock did not match any British, American, or Soviet manufacture. One internal report, classified Top Secret UK Eyes Only, posited that the imagery had been captured from an airborne platform operating at over 15,000 meters, well above the service ceiling of surviving German aircraft. Tracing the chain of custody proved impossible. The reels had been stored in a steel ammunition box lined with wax paper and cotton, the box itself bearing a faint Luftwaffe eagle stamp and a number sequence partially filed off. The label Bernsteinvogel appeared nowhere in surviving German operational documents, though a fragmentary intercept from the closing months of the war referenced a Vogel B program under the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, believed to involve high-altitude reconnaissance. The breakthrough came in March 1948, when an MI6 liaison officer in Berlin received an anonymous tip. An engineer named Otto Siebrecht, formerly of the Luftwaffe's Fernhof-Klärungsgruppe, was alive and living under a false identity in the Soviet sector. Siebrecht, when covertly questioned, admitted to working on a project in 1944 aimed at creating an untraceable observer for post-war deployment. His description matched an unmanned glider equipped with an advanced camera array, designed to be launched from modified U-boats. Siebrecht claimed the prototypes were destroyed in April 1945 near Kiel, but his demeanor suggested he was holding something back. The British attempted to exfiltrate Siebrecht in June 1948, but the operation failed. Soviet authorities arrested him for economic crimes, and he disappeared into the Gulag system. A month later, the Bernsteinvogel microfilm reels were sealed in a classified archive under Admiralty control, with no public acknowledgement of their existence. Cold War politics further obscured the case. In 1955, declassified U.S. Air Force intelligence memos revealed that similar high-altitude imagery, again postdating the war, had surfaced in West Germany. The photographs were traced to a black market dealer in Hamburg who claimed they originated from a cache hidden in Norway. The U.S. designated the material as likely related to Operation Luster, a suspected Soviet intelligence gathering program. The connection to Bernsteinvogel was noted but not pursued. Rumors persisted within intelligence circles that Bernsteinvogel was not purely a German project. A French military attaché in London confided to a colleague in 1961 that one of his contacts in Moscow had seen the same codename in a GRU file, paired with the codename Oran 9, a known designation for aerial monitoring of Western troop movements in occupied Germany. This raised the possibility that the post-war photographs had been part of an ongoing exchange between surviving Luftwaffe technicians and Soviet intelligence. In 1974, a retired Royal Navy officer, Commander Hugh Maddock, gave an off-record interview to a BBC researcher, claiming that the microfilm reels had been studied in collaboration with the CIA during the Korean War. According to Maddock, the analysts were less interested in the photographs themselves than in the technical characteristics of the camera system, particularly its stability under extreme altitude and temperature conditions. Maddock insisted that certain American reconnaissance programs in the late 1950s bore unmistakable traces of Bernsteinvogel's technology. When the British National Archives began declassifying late World War II intelligence material in the 1990s, researchers looked for the Bernsteinvogel files. They were not among the releases. Freedom of Information requests were met with stock replies citing national security. Even the Admiralty's official historian, in a private letter to a colleague, admitted he had no access to the file, nor knowledge of its present location. The trawler itself was quietly broken up in Copenhagen in 1949, but one of its navigation logs survived in a Danish police file. The final entry, written in a hurried, unsteady hand, recorded a rendezvous with aerial contact at 1840 hours, and an instruction to secure cargo for southern transfer. The meaning of southern transfer remains unknown, though some have speculated it referred to a planned delivery point in Portugal or Spain, both of which had post-war ties to former German intelligence operatives. Today, Bernsteinvogel exists only as a codename, a handful of untraceable photographs, and a chain of dead ends stretching across Europe. The location of the remaining reels, if more exist, has never been confirmed. What they may contain, and whether they document the closing acts of the Third Reich or the opening gambits of the Cold War, is a question that intelligence services on both sides of the former Iron Curtain still seem reluctant to answer. On March 4, 1961, a maintenance crew in Lodz, Poland, began clearing rubble from a derelict rail depot slated for demolition. Beneath a collapsed section of platform, their shovels struck reinforced steel plating, an anomaly in a structure built in the 1920s. By the third day of work, they exposed the corner of a welded metal vault, its surface pitted with rust but still solid. Local officials contacted the Polish State Security Service, who arrived in plain clothes and ordered the site sealed. The vault was opened under floodlights on March 12, in the presence of engineers from the Ministry of National Defense. Inside were 27 binders wrapped in oilcloth, each stamped with the emblem of a spread-wing eagle clutching a cogwheel, a symbol not found in standard Wehrmacht insignia. The cover pages bore the designation Abteilung Forschung D7 and the classification Nur für den Dienstgebrauch, for official use only. The paper was brittle but legible, typed in dense German with technical drawings and tables interspersed. The contents described a series of experimental artillery shells and mortar rounds fitted with cryogenic compound reservoirs, ordnance designed to rupture on impact, dispersing a freezing agent capable of immobilizing mechanical equipment and, according to some annotations, rendering terrain impassable for hours. One section included chilling, literally and figuratively, calculations for targeted personnel incapacitation at sub-zero shock levels. The project, according to the documents, had been tested at a remote site referred to only as Onlage Nordlicht in the winter of 1944-45. Chemical analysis of residue found in sealed sample vials revealed a fluorocarbon mixture unknown in contemporary industrial use, with extreme volatility when exposed to open air. The Polish chemists noted that even after nearly 2 decades, the traces emitted a sharp, metallic odor. Handwritten marginalia in one binder mentioned a deployment order for Kola sector, dated March 17, 1945, an apparent reference to the Soviet Arctic region. No Soviet record has ever confirmed receipt or interception of such weapons. The discovery triggered immediate geopolitical tension. Within 48 hours of the vault's opening, a Soviet delegation arrived in Warsaw, demanding custody of all materials. Moscow claimed that under wartime agreements, all military remnants found on Polish soil fell under Soviet salvage rights. Polish authorities reluctantly agreed to transfer the binders to the USSR, but not before photographing and microfilming the entire cache in secret. NATO became aware of the incident through an intercepted cable from the Soviet embassy in Warsaw to Moscow. The cable referenced D-7 Arctic munitions, potential adaptation for area denial. By April 1961, the CIA had compiled a file noting that the described weaponry could, if replicated, neutralize armored advances in extreme climates without conventional explosives. This raised fears that the Soviet Union might adapt the design for use in northern Norway or the Alaskan approaches. Efforts to trace Abteilung Furs Chung D-7 through surviving German records proved frustrating. The unit did not appear in official Wehrmacht order of battle lists, nor in SS organizational charts. However, a single mention surfaced in a captured OKW communications log from February 1945, describing transfer of D-7 personnel to Sudeten sector, rail transport priority red. No destination was given. Historians later speculated that the Sudeten mention could have been a cover for relocation to hidden facilities in the Ore Mountains. In 1982, a defector from the Soviet chemical weapons program claimed during debriefing that he had once seen the D-7 binders in a locked archive at the Kirov Military Chemical Institute. According to him, the materials were being studied not for replication, but for reverse engineering to develop non-lethal battlefield control agents. He described seeing a test photograph of a frozen railway junction somewhere north of Murmansk, though the authenticity of his account could not be confirmed. Curiously, Polish archival staff involved in microfilming the documents in 1961 reported that 2 binders were missing from the original sequence when delivered for duplication. These were believed to contain field trial reports. The absence of those volumes has fueled speculation that certain test results may have been deliberately withheld, possibly by Polish security services hoping to retain bargaining material. When the Polish microfilm copies were quietly declassified in 2004, researchers noted an odd inconsistency. While most diagrams were in metric, a handful used imperial measurements, particularly in the schematics for the cryogenic dispersal mechanism. This raised the unsettling possibility that the project may have drawn on pre-war foreign industrial patents, though no origin could be identified. Today, only partial reconstructions of D-7's work exist. The Soviet originals remain unreleased, if they survived at all. No physical munitions from the project have ever been recovered, and Anlage Nordlicht has never been definitively located. A few surviving pages bear handwritten initials, possibly those of an engineer named Erich Plamen, whose name appears in no known personnel rosters but is linked by post-war rumor to a mysterious disappearance from Hamburg in 1946. The vault beneath Lodz was dismantled within a week of its discovery, its steel plating sold for scrap. The site is now a parking lot, with no marker to suggest that beneath its asphalt once lay one of the most peculiar, and potentially dangerous, fragments of Germany's wartime weapons research. Whether D-7's designs were ever successfully weaponized after the war remains a matter of speculation, buried beneath layers of denial and half-truths. At 23:47 on September 2, 1952, radar operators at Thule Air Base, Greenland, tracked an unidentified aircraft descending rapidly from the northeast. The contact had no transponder, no radio calls, and an erratic but controlled flight path. Weather over the airfield was poor, low ceiling, crosswinds gusting to 40 knots. Yet the unknown aircraft lined up and landed without ground clearance on a secondary strip normally reserved for cargo. By the time security personnel reached it, the crew was already on the tarmac, speaking low among themselves in Russian-accented voices. The 4-man crew presented forged U.S. Army Transport Corps identification, but their uniforms were devoid of insignia and constructed from a synthetic fiber unfamiliar to the base quartermaster. Their aircraft, a twin-engine transport, roughly the dimensions of a C-47 but with an unfamiliar tail assembly, bore no markings except a faint, partially sanded serial on the port fuselage. In the cargo hold sat 3 large crates stenciled in block capitals, Machinery, Type K. Base Commander Colonel William C. Draper ordered the cargo area sealed and notified Strategic Air Command. By 2:15, 2 officers from the Air Technical Intelligence Center, ATIC, had arrived by special transport. They began photographing and measuring the crates before ordering them moved into a hangar under armed guard. Personnel who witnessed the operation later recalled that the equipment inside bore a striking resemblance to the rumored Nazi Schallfelgerät, a classified acoustic array allegedly tested near Königsberg in late 1944 for long-range disruption of enemy communications and radar. The crew was transferred to an isolated barracks for questioning. Although they answered in fluent English, their testimonies contradicted one another. One claimed they were ferrying industrial generators to the U.S. for testing. Another insisted their route originated in Reykjavik, though flight records from Iceland showed no such departure. No official customs or diplomatic paperwork was produced. ATIC's lead investigator, Major Ernest L. Colby, filed an interim report noting possible exfiltration of Axis-derived technology from Soviet-controlled territory via neutral intermediaries. Within 24 hours, the crates and crew were loaded onto a U.S. Air Force C-124 and flown south. Official records list their destination as Andrews AFB, Transit, but multiple air traffic logs from that night contain a blank space in place of their routing. Unverified accounts from former Nevada test site employees suggest the cargo was delivered instead to a restricted hangar at Groom Lake, then under CIA operational control. The original aircraft remained at Thule for 5 days before a detachment from the 9th Air Force arrived to disassemble it. Witnesses said the engines were unlike standard Pratt & Whitney R-1830s, employing an unfamiliar gear reduction system. The propeller hubs were stamped with a manufacturer's mark no one recognized, 3 interlocking triangles surrounding the number 11. Photographs taken by base mechanics were reportedly confiscated by visiting Air Force intelligence officers. In November 1952, an internal SAC briefing to the Joint Chiefs contained a single paragraph referencing recent acquisition of communications disruptive apparatus of non-domestic origin, currently under evaluation. The language matched descriptions from wartime OSS reports about Schallfeld, which allegedly emitted directed low-frequency sound waves to interfere with aircraft instruments and possibly induce physiological effects in personnel within its field. Attempts to trace the origin of Machinery Type K through captured German archives proved fruitless. No procurement records or design papers matched the recovered components. Some researchers noted that the partial fuselage serial on the mysterious transport 09K-347 bore similarities to Luftwaffe numbering conventions for experimental prototypes, though by 1952 such airframes should have been long scrapped or in museum custody. The crew's fate remains obscured. A declassified Air Force memo from January 1953 mentions their transfer to external agency jurisdiction, without naming the agency. All 4 names in the personnel intake forms were later confirmed to be aliases. No death certificates, immigration records, or subsequent sightings have been substantiated. In 1978, a retired ATIC technician anonymously contacted a Canadian aviation historian, claiming to have seen the dismantled Type K apparatus at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1954. According to his account, the device comprised an array of parabolic reflectors mounted on a rotating platform, driven by a precision gearbox unlike anything in U.S. production. He described its control console as more like a pipe organ than a radar set, with banks of levers and foot pedals. By the late 1980s, Schallfeld had entered the realm of rumor, dismissed by most as an unproven wartime curiosity. Yet an FOIA request in 1993 for all Air Force documents relating to Machinery Type K returned a response that the files were exempt from release under national defense provisions. That same year, a photograph surfaced at an estate sale in Ohio depicting an unmarked transport aircraft on a windswept airfield, its tailplane matching the Thule witnesses' descriptions. Behind it, in the open cargo bay, is a large, curved metallic structure partially obscured by a tarpaulin. No confirmation has ever been made that the photograph depicts the 1952 incident. Officially, the U.S. Air Force maintains no record of an unscheduled landing at Thule on September 2nd of that year. The only surviving operational log for that night is missing several pages, neatly cut from the binder. Whatever machinery Type K was, and wherever it came from, it arrived in North America quietly, and vanished just as quickly into the vaults of classified history. In November 1989, as East Germany dissolved and Stasi headquarters were overrun by protesters, thousands of shredded documents spilled into the streets. Amid the chaos, a Western journalist recovered an intact manila folder stamped with the classification ZK-Nullpunkt, streng vertraulich. Inside were typewritten German-language reports dated 1946, bearing both Soviet GRU and former German Abwehr letterheads. The contents described a joint covert mission to an undisclosed location in the Erzgebirge, the Ore Mountains, near the Czech border. According to the earliest report, dated March 4, 1946, Soviet operatives and captured Abwehr officers rendezvoused at a rail siding near Annaberg-Buchholz. Their orders were to locate and secure a continuation command, believed to have been established in the war's final weeks. The document's phrasing suggested that certain ministries of the Third Reich, particularly those tied to weapons research, had been instructed to regroup in a hidden facility to await post-war reactivation. The team advanced on foot into heavily forested terrain. A second report, filed 10 days later, noted the discovery of a camouflaged tunnel entrance set into a granite slope. The outer door was of reinforced steel, painted in a disruptive pattern, and fitted with demolition charges wired to a control box inside. After disabling the explosives, the operatives entered a descending corridor lined with ventilation ducts still humming softly. Electrical power appeared to be running from an underground generator. The third and most detailed report contained an inventory of what lay inside: rows of wooden crates marked with Reichsadler stamps, racks of rifles still coated in cosmoline, field telephones connected to an internal exchange, and a map room with detailed charts of European industrial sites, many annotated with post-May 1945 changes in control. Most unsettling was the mention of armed sentries encountered in one of the lower galleries, wearing Wehrmacht field uniforms without insignia. The report claims these individuals surrendered without resistance after brief negotiations conducted in Russian. One entry described a sealed chamber accessible only through a blast door marked "Nur auf Befehl des Ministers," only on the minister's orders. The door was not opened during the mission. A marginal note in the Soviet officer's handwriting reads, "Suspected archive or prototype storage. Priority extraction required." The records abruptly stop after the fourth report, dated March 22, 1946. Half of the photographs referenced in the text were missing from the folder. Those that remained were scratched or marred by chemical stains. A blurred image shows a row of metal canisters on a storage rack, each about a meter long and bearing stenciled numbers beginning with -0 Zambian kwacha. Another depicts a partially collapsed tunnel wall revealing what appears to be a second, smaller passage descending further into the rock. Western intelligence first learned of ZK-Nullpunkt in the early 1990s when the folder was smuggled out of Berlin. Analysts speculated that Nullpunkt might have been a code name for a 0 point, either a reset in command structure or a reference to experimental physics. The possibility that the bunker contained unrecovered technology was taken seriously enough that several NATO reconnaissance flights were tasked with photographing the Ore Mountains for anomalies. Interviews with surviving Soviet veterans proved inconclusive. One former GRU sergeant, speaking in 1994, recalled a black room in the bunker that smelled strongly of ozone and where no one stayed long without feeling dizzy. Another claimed the mission's real objective was to locate a specific engineer, possibly involved in weapons research, who had evaded capture in May 1945. Neither account could be verified. The Stasi archivists who handled the folder in later decades were equally opaque. An internal East German memo from 1978, discovered in a separate file, instructed that ZK-Nullpunkt references are not to be entered into central indexes, and that all physical records were to be stored in Facility 12, an archive whose location remains unknown. By 2001, geological surveys of the Annaberg-Buchholz area had mapped several unexplored adits from wartime mining operations. A Czech caving group reported finding concrete blast walls deep within one abandoned shaft, but before they could investigate further, the site was sealed by authorities citing landslide danger. No public excavation has been attempted since. The fate of the Continuation Command personnel remains a mystery. Post-war Allied prisoner rosters contain no matching mass captures in the Ore Mountains during March 1946. Likewise, no official Soviet acknowledgement exists that such an operation ever took place. The crates, canisters, and any archival material recovered are absent from known inventories of captured German material. What remains is the thin, fragmentary evidence of ZK-Nullpunkt, a handful of damaged photographs for incomplete reports, and an enduring question: if a functioning, supplied and guarded bunker existed in the Ore Mountains a full year after the war's end, what was its purpose, and why did both Soviet and German operatives move to conceal its existence? The answer may still lie sealed behind a blast door somewhere in the Granite Hills, humming quietly on forgotten generators. Some truths are not buried, they are entombed, sealed in iron and guarded by the very hands that once built them. Decades may pass, flags may change, but the hum of the machinery never stops. Somewhere, behind a wall no one is allowed to touch, the past is still breathing, and it knows we're looking for it.